Hi, how's it going? In this video, we're going to be learning about loops. So loops are used in Python to repeat code, and there are two main types of loops. So there's for loops and while loops. In this video, we're going to be learning about for loops, which is used when you know how many times that you want the loop to iterate for. So if you know that you want the loop to iterate a specific number of times, then for loops are great. While loops are better if you don't know how many times you want the loop to run, but that's for another video. So to understand for loops, I have a flowchart over here, and that will help you understand the steps that a for loop takes and how it actually executes the code. So at the start here, we enter the for loop and we meet this test condition. So over here, you have a test condition, and this is a statement which evaluates to either true or false. So you can see here we have true or false, and depending on that, it will go to different areas of this flowchart. So an example of a test condition could be x is greater than 5, x is less than or equal to 2. So let's say that the condition evaluates to true. So it will go to the right over here and it will enter the body of the for loop. So that just means that it will enter the body. So let's say we have a for loop for I in x. So don't worry about this. We're going to explain this a bit later, but inside this for loop we have some lines of code which is indented, so it's to the right of the for keyword, and this code inside will be executed if the condition is true. Okay, and then after that we go back here and we meet the condition again, and if the condition is true, we enter the body of the for loop again, and that repeats again, and then we check the condition again. And as you can see, here's the loop. So if the condition is true, we're just stuck in this loop forever. But there is a scenario where the condition is false. So once the condition is false, we exit out of the loop and the loop terminates. So that means that the code written next in the program just runs. So whatever is outside of the loop will run. Okay, let's learn about for loops by looking at some examples. So at the top here, I have some code which says for x in range 10, print x. So the for keyword is used in every single for loop, and x is just a variable. So I could call this whatever I want. I could call this I could call this happy, number. It could be anything, but I'm just going to keep it as x. And this range function, so this is used specifically for numbers. So let's have a look at what the output is. So maybe you can have a quick guess. So what do you think this will print? It's going up to 10 and it's looping. So let's see what it prints. So as you can see here, it starts at 0 and it goes all the way up to 9. So even though that we pass the function the value 10, it goes up to that value, but it doesn't include it. So it doesn't include 10. It just stops one before. So it stops at 9. So that's quite important to remember. But we'll look at some more examples to help you remember that. So this variable x, it initially stores the value 0. So that's why we have 0 here. And then once we go through the first iteration of the loop, this value increases to 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. So we have this loop until we get to the value 10. So the reason that 10 is not printed is because 10 is not less than 10. So all of these values, 0, is it less than 10? Yes. So we're going to loop again. Is 1 less than 10? Yes. Is 2 less than 10? Yes. 3, 4, 5. 9. Is 9 less than 10? Yes. Is 10 less than 10? No. So that's the reason we don't actually iterate through that last part, and we don't print 10. It stops 1 before. And that's a key thing to remember. If we do want to print 10, that's fine. We just need to pass it 11, and then we'll go from 0 to 10. Okay, let's look at the next example. So what do you think this one will print? So we have for I in range 15, print I. Let's have a look. So yeah, you're right. It prints 0 up to 14. So the range function, it always starts at 0 and it stops 1 before. So we can, of course, change this. And we'll look at an example right now on how we can change some parts of the for loop. So let's say we want to increment, not in ones this time. So we want to go up in twos. So this for loop does that. So let's run it and see what happens. So we have 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So we're starting at 0. We're ending at 10, but we're not including 10. And we're going up in twos. So as you can see over here, we have 3 arguments, but over here we only have 1, and that might be a bit confusing. So the range function, it accepts 3 arguments. So these arguments are the start value, the stop value, and the step. So the start value is what we want to start at. So over here we have 0, and by default all for loops start at 0 if they use the range function. So that's why you don't actually need to include it if you want to start at 0. So that's why over here we have only got the stop value. So the start and step values are actually optional. So the only mandatory argument that you have to pass is the stop. So over here we're starting at 0, we're ending at 10, but remember we're not including 10. And what is our step value? What are we increasing by? We're increasing in 2s this time. By default it's 1. That's why these ones at the top, they were just increasing in 1. So I just left that out because we don't actually need to include that, because by default all for loops that use the range function increase by 1. But over here I manually changed that so that it increases by 2 each time. So that's why you can see that this is going up in 2s. Okay, now let's look at the last for loop and let's see what it will print. So you can see here that the arguments are 0, 10, 5. So let's see what the output looks like. So yeah, over here we print 0 and 5. So we're starting at 0, we're stopping at 10, but we're not including 10, and we're going up in 5s. So this for loop, it initially holds the value 0, and then it checks is 0 less than 10. Yes, it is. So then we're going to increment by 5. Okay, now is 5 less than 10? Yes, it is. So we're going to print 5. Okay, and then we're going to increment by 5 again. Is 10 less than 10? No, it's not. So we're not going to print 10, and we're going to exit out of the for loop. Okay, now I want you to have a go at these. So this is a small exercise which is really good practice for you. I want you to comment down below what you think the output will be for each of these 5 for loops. And remember that the arguments for the range function are start, stop, step. Once you're ready, you can carry on playing the video and I'll explain the solutions. Okay, here's the solutions for the 5 problems. So for question 1, 2, and 3, you should have got these. And for 4 and 5, you should have got this. So now I'm just going to explain each of these. So let's start with question 1. So the arguments are 0, 30, and 10. That means that we're going to start at 0. We're going to stop at 30, but not including 30. And we're going up by 10 each time. So for this one, you're going to start at 0. The program checks, is 0 less than 30? Yes, it is. So we're increasing by 10. Printing 10. And is 10 less than 30? Yes, it is. So we're going to increase by 10 again. And we're going to get 20. So is 20 less than 30? Yes, it is. So we're going to increase by 10 again. And now the program is checking, is 30 less than 30? So if it is true, then it will enter this the body of the for loop. But if it's not true, it will just terminate. So the for loop will terminate. So 30 is not less than 30. So we're not going to enter the for loop, and the for loop will just terminate. So this is the result: 0, 10, and 20. Okay, let's look at question 2 now. So the arguments are 1, 10, and 2. So we're going to start at 1, and we're going up in 2s up to 10, but not including 10. So is 1 less than 10? Yes, it is. So we're going to enter the for loop. Is 3 less than 10? So we're going up in 2s. Yes, it is. Is 5 less than 10? Yes, it is. So we're going to print that. Is 7 less than 10? Yes. Is 9 less than 10? Yes. Is 11 less than 10? No, it's not. So we're not going to enter the body of the for loop, and the for loop is just going to terminate. So this is just going to be a result: 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, so for number 3, we have something slightly different. So we're starting at 10, and we're stopping at 0, and we're going down by 1 each time. So you can go down, just use the negative sign. So we're starting at 10. Is 10 greater than 0? Yes, it is. So we're going to just decrement, and we're going to keep following this logic. So is 8 greater than 0? Yes, it is. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, is 0 less than 0? No, it's not. So we're not going to actually print this. We're not going to enter this for loop. The for loop will terminate at this point. So this will be our output. So 10, 9, 8, all the way up to 1. So it doesn't include the stop value. Okay, question 4 is another one that is going down, but this time it's going down in 5. So we're checking, is 20 greater than 0? Yes, it is. Is 15 greater than 0? Yes, it is. 10, 5, and now we're checking, is 0 less than 0? is 0 greater than 0? No, it's not. So we're not going to enter the body of the for loop. So this is just starting at 20. It's going down to 0, but not including 0, and it's going down by 5. So this will be the output. Okay, for the last one, we're going down in tens. So we're starting at 100, and we're going down in tens until we get to 50, but not including 50. So this will just print 90, 80, 70, 60, and not 50, because for all of these, 100 is greater than 50, but when you get to so 60 is greater than 50, that's true. Is 50 greater than 50? No, it's not. So that means that we're not going to enter the body of the for loop, and the loop will just terminate. So I hope this gives you a good idea of how the range function works in Python. So far we have only been looking at for loops when iterating with numbers using the range function. But you can also use for loops to iterate through things like lists. So here we have a list of students, and we have their names. So Bob, Mike, Sally, and Alice. And what we're doing is we're using a for loop to loop through each student and print their names. So let's look at let's take a loop at the output and see what it prints. So we have Bob, Mike, Sally, Alice printed on separate lines. So let's update this code so it's slightly more complicated. So what we need to do is take a few seconds just to read the code and make a prediction of what the code will output once I run it. Okay, so now I'm going to run the code, and this is the output. So it prints Fred, Mike, and it prints found a new student, Sally. Okay, let's go through the code line by line and I'll explain why the program runs the way it does. So first we have a list called students, and we have Fred, Mike, Sally, Alice, Gary. We also have another list called new students. So we have Sally and Gary. So as you can notice, Sally and Gary are on both lists, and Sally and Gary are both new students, and obviously they are students as well. So we use a for loop to loop through all of these students, and we have this if statement which checks if the student inside this list is a new student, and if they are, we just print that we found a new student, and we print their name as well. And remember, we use this variable I to access their name. So at the start of the first iteration of the for loop, I will hold the value Fred, and then on the next iteration it will hold the value Mike, Sally, and so on. And once we found a new student, we actually break out of the loop. So the first new student we have is Sally. So we print Fred, Mike, and once we get to Sally, this if condition is true because Sally is a new student. Sally is inside this list as well. So we print found a new student, Sally, and we break. So break is a keyword in Python which immediately exits out of the loop. So you can use it both for loops and while loops. And at the end here we have a print a line which says print I, and this line will run if this if condition is not true. So for example, when it was Fred, it would just skip this if condition because all of this code will be skipped because the if condition is not true. So we'll just print Fred, and same for Mike, but for Sally the if condition is true. So now I'm going to introduce a new keyword in Python which is continue. So let's change break to continue, and let's see how that changes the code. So as you can see, the output has changed. So we have Fred and Mike found a new student, Sally, Alice found a new student, Gary. So before we were just stopping right after this line, and these two lines at the bottom weren't printed. So let's take a look at why. So before we had a break statement here, so that broke out of the for loop, but now we have continue. So if we have continue, that just means that on that iteration, instead of breaking out or carrying on with the for loop, we're going to skip to the next iteration. So we're immediately going to go to the start of the next for loop's iteration. So I'll just run through the code. So at the start we have Fred. So we're looping through this array over here, or this list, and we have Fred. And is Fred a new student? No, he's not. So we're going to just jump to this line over here. We're not going to go inside this if statement, and we have print I. So we're just going to print Fred, and that's what we have here. And the same thing for Mike. So Mike is just going to be printed, and once we get to Sally, Sally is a new student. So we're going to print found a new student, Sally, and because we have this continue statement here, we're going to immediately jump to the for loops condition. We're not going to carry on with the rest of the code inside the for loop. So we're not going to print I. So we're not just going to print Sally by itself on a line. That's why you don't see Sally by itself. So we jump to the next iteration and we have Alice. So is Alice a new student? No. So we're just going to print Alice. And the last name inside this list is Gary. So is Gary a new student? Yes, he is. So we're going to print found a new student Gary, and we're going to continue. And at this stage, there are no more names inside the students list. So we're just going to terminate the for loop. And yeah, that's it. So that's how this for loop works. Okay, so now I have an exercise for you to solve. So this is a simple times tables program which just uses one for loop. And just a hint before you get started is all of these values here are the same. So the main reason we need the for loop is to increment the values that we're timesing by. So 1, 2, 3, and we're going all the way up to 12. So have a think carefully about what your arguments will be for the range function, because you're going to be starting at 1 and you're going to be going up to 12. So once you're ready, you can carry on playing the video, and I'll just show you how I would code my solution to this problem. Okay, so here's my code for this problem. So what you can notice here is I used a for loop with the arguments set as 1 and 13. So I included the start as 1 and the end as 13. And remember, this doesn't include 13, so it just goes up to 13, but it doesn't include it. So this actually goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 12. And I haven't included the step because remember, the step is just by default 1. So there's no, it's optional to add it in. I could, if I wanted, I could add 1 there as well. But yeah, let's see what my for loop does. So it prints the n. So n is just the times tables that the user passed into the function. So this function got past the value 11, so this will always print 11. And we have str here just to convert this integer to a string so that we can concatenate it or join it with other strings. And over here we have an x, so this just represents the times sign. And over here we have the actual number here. So remember, this is the value that we're timesing by, and this is the reason we need a for loop. It's just so that we can increment these values here. And I'm using the I variable in the for loop because I know that that's going to start at 1 and it's going to go all the way up to 12. So I'm just going to, on each iteration, I want to times by this value, and this value changes on each iteration. It increases by 1, so it goes from 1 up to 12, so it goes up to from 1 up to 13, but it doesn't include 13. And next we have just joined the equal sign, and remember I need these double quotes to because it's a string. And finally here we have the actual calculation. So for 11 times 2, we need to times 11 by 2. So this just multiplies the values and it converts this to a string so we can print it. And I have also included this blank line. This is optional. You don't really need this blank line, but it's just to have some space between the values. And yeah, that's essentially how this function works. Here's another exercise for you to solve that uses for loops. So what I have here is a triangle made out of asterisks. So at the top here we have 1 asterisk, then 2, 3, 4, 5. So have a go at using the range function to think about how you can code this. And once you're ready to see the solution, then feel free to carry on playing the video and I'll explain how I would code my answer to this. Okay, here's how I would code my triangle function. So I have a variable called char and it holds an asterisk. And here's my for loop. So it starts at 1. The reason it starts at 1 is because the top line just has 1 asterisk. So we need to start at 1. And as you can see, the last line has 5 asterisks. So if I just put length over here, so that would just hold 5, then it would just print 4 asterisks at the bottom. And that's because the range function, the stop argument, it goes up to that value, but it doesn't include it. And that's the reason I have this +1. That's the reason that this is necessary. And I could have a step argument of 1, but by default it's already 1, so I don't need to include that. And what I do inside the for loop is I print the character I number of times. So on the first iteration, it'll print it once because I is 1, and then it'll print it twice because I is 2, and 3, 4, 5 times. And yeah, so I could, because I coded this in a function and I didn't hard code it, I can just change whatever argument I pass to the triangle function, and this can make a a larger triangle. And yeah, that's a pretty cool program that uses for loops. Okay, so now I have this final exercise, and if you can code this, then you really have a good understanding of for loops, because this can get a little bit tricky, but with some patience, I'm sure you can do it. So what this essentially does is it prints a row of counters, and in the first row we have 3, then we have 5, and then we have 7. And as you can see, it has like a pyramid structure. And yeah, have a go at coding this, and once you're ready to see the solution, play the video and I'll explain how I would do it. Okay, so here's my solution. So I coded this using a function, and over here in my arguments I have first row and last row, and this just corresponds to the number of starting and the number of counters on the top line and the number of counters on the bottom line. So if I change these values, then the program should still work. So if I put 3 and 49, you can see I have 3 counters at the top and 49 at the bottom. So I'll just leave that as 7, and let's go through the code. So the main part of this code is the for loop. So the for loop uses the range function, and it accepts 3 arguments. So I start at the first row. So I start at 3, and I'll just write down what it does. So it starts at 3, and it goes up to the last row. So it goes up to 7, add 2. So it goes up to 9. But remember, it doesn't include 9. So because this is going up in 2s, it will actually stop at 7. So it will go 3, 5, 7, and it will stop. And what it does is it prints the number of spaces. So how I calculate the number of spaces is you have to notice that on the top line we have 2 spaces, and then we have 1 space on the second line, and then 0 spaces. So how can we calculate how many spaces we need on the top line? Well, if you find the difference between 7, which is the number of counters here, and 3, you get 4. And if you halve that, you get 2, which is the number of spaces here. But on each iteration, it actually decreases by 1. And that's the reason over here I have number of spaces minus equals 1. So that on each, once we get to the next row, we need 1 less space. Okay, so I print the number of spaces that we need. And I also use this end equals double quotes. So this just means that instead of starting a new line, we're going to just create an empty string. So basically in Python, whenever we use the print function, so I'll just show you quickly. If I print 5 and then I print 6, this will print on separate lines. But let's say you want 5 and 6 to be right next to each other. How would you do that? So you can print 5, and you could just type end, and then you could put an empty string here. And here you can see that we have 5 and 6 right next to each other. So this basically cancels out the fact that Python automatically starts a new line once a new print function is called. Instead of starting a new line, now it just puts it right next to the 6. So that's what we want for this program. So next I just print an empty line. So as you can see, between the equal signs, I have a blank line. It's not really necessary, but yeah, you could do that. And yeah, like I said before, I'm decrementing the number of spaces on each row, because we need 1 less space each time. So here we have 2, then we have 1, then we have 0. So yeah, and here's my calculation for how I calculate the number of spaces. So like I said before, I just subtract, I find the difference between the first row and the last row, and I divide it by 2. So just to go over that one more time, 7 take away 3 is 4, divided by 2 is 2, so we have 2 spaces here. And yeah, so that's how I would code my solution to this problem. And I hope you enjoyed the video. So if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and please comment down below what you think of the video and anything that you want me to upload next. And I really appreciate you watching, and have a lovely day.